today is Anders Corr. He's the publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and principal at Corr Analytics. He's also the author of the new book, Concentration of Power, Institutionalization, Hierarchy, and Hegemony. Thanks for being here in person.
Thank you.
This is a treat. This almost never happens post-COVID for us.
Yeah, we'd like to think you came all the way to New York City just for this.
I did. Absolutely.
Naturally.
Of course.
Naturally. All right. So yeah, you had this great new book, and we'll tell us a little bit about it. What is concentration of power?
The idea here is it's a historical theory. If you look over thousands of years of history, back to the days when there were tribes and kingdoms, those tribes and kingdoms tended to fight with each other or unify in some way. And over time, political units became bigger and bigger. Kingdoms became states, states became empires. When the empires broke down, we got other large political unit systems, which are now alliance blocks. So if you look over time, there's a gradual growth in the geographic size of states, empires, alliance systems in terms of their size.
And so this would include things like the Dutch East India Company.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to be a state-based thing. It can be like these enormous, today, like these multinational corporations.
Exactly. So things get bigger, power gets bigger, hierarchies get bigger. And not only do they get bigger geographically, but they control the individual to a greater and greater degree over time. So people, back in the days when, life was nasty, brutish, and short, as Hobbes says, people were actually more free, but now we're more secure, but we're less free.
So what are some ways these hierarchies control people or are gaining more control over people?
They gain control by incentive. I mean, one of the ways in which they gain control is by incentives and disincentives. So whoever has power uses the power that they already have to maintain that power through incentives and disincentives of the individuals that are within the unit. And so when conditions would be ripe for the breakup of their hierarchies, they don't break up because they have the power to offer incentives to people to stay within the hierarchy. However, when the conditions are right for growing their hierarchies bigger or growing their territories bigger, they're able to do that.
So guns don't kill people, hierarchies kill people.
Exactly.
Got it?
But I'm thinking of like the EU, right? So the EU is essentially, it's not a state, but it's this alliance that's more than just a military or diplomatic alliance. It's a currency alliance. So the EU controls, for example, monetary policy, and none of the individual countries get to control it, except the UK, but we know how that went, right? And so like that's a type of power structure. And so like what kind of control does that have over people's lives, for example?
I would argue it has an increasing level of control over people's lives, and that the EU is a proto-state. It's a state that's in formation, that in 100 years or 200 years or maybe 10 or 20 years, it could be like a state. Already Macron, for example, President Macron of France is arguing that the EU should have an army, its own army. Because of COVID, they've put in for the first time, they've put in a EU level debt that is transcending the national level debt. So the EU is taking on its own debt.
Essentially, it kind of sounds like the goal is like the Star Trek kind of, United Federation of Earth. It's just this, one world government.
Yeah, it may not be the goal, but it's the end. It's the likely end. If you follow logically what's going on, we are trending, I would argue, towards a single global government of some sort.
Is it going to be the EU?
Probably not, because they're not very tough, really. I would say it's going to be either the CCP is going to lead it because they're the ones that are the toughest and they're trying to lead it, or it could be the current system that we have, which is pretty decent in terms of an international system of sovereign states that's diverse, that's trending towards democracy. I mean, that was the ideal of the United Nations when it was first formulated by Churchill and FDR in the Atlantic Charter in 1942.
So is the United Nations kind of one of these things that you're talking about, which is like a larger concentration of power than these sovereign states?
Yeah, it could be. Especially, it could be a force to maintain the independence of sovereign states, which I think is how it was envisioned. But I think that the way in which the CCP is trying to suborn it for its own purposes is to use it to try to promote its own power. So they're trying to turn it into a global government, whereas it was really originally meant to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states.
I mean, I'm familiar with how the CCP is kind of using UN rules to benefit itself, but how is it trying to turn it into a global government?
Well, I think that, they, for example, with the information system, they are trying to promote laws that will, that through the UN, that support censorship, basically allow autocratic governments around the world to censor people. They use their own massive economic power to get countries in the UN General Assembly to vote the way China wants them to vote. So they're essentially able to start controlling the UN. If they're able to control the UN and no one really opposes them, we're in trouble.
It reminds me of how they just got their second guy put in charge of Interpol. Like, the first Chinese head of the Interpol.
Guy,
I know you're worried, Chris, but don't worry because the UN has the Human Rights Council that's going to protect everyone.
That's right. China runs that. But China just buys off enough countries and they get the votes they need for whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
But it reminds me a lot of like physics or matter, like the idea of like power and how it concentrates. Like, matter, if matter was just all diffuse, there would be no planets, nothing could exist. So it is good that, things coalesce, they condense. But eventually, if it gets too condensed, you get a black hole.
Exactly. It's very much like gravity.
Yeah.
Power tends to gravitate to itself because it's because people with a lot of power try to get more power, and they have the power to get more power. People without power have no power to get more power. So they lose out. And
they get the power to make a difference.
We wish.
I mean, sometimes empires fall, like the British Empire, the Roman Empire. So how does that fit into the concentration of power?
So my argument is that empires tend to fall when there are other bigger, stronger empires that defeat them. So if you look throughout history, the British Empire was defeated in a way because of, there was an internal war within Europe, and it was defeated that way. The U.S. was so powerful after that it imposed its world order, through the UN, its vision of world order. We often don't think about it that way because we're Americans, but it did impose a belief system about promoting democracy, promoting human rights globally, promoting the sovereign state, territorial integrity. These are all the concepts that are in the Atlantic Charter that ended up in the UN system. The Roman Empire, when it broke down, was defeated by the Mongol hordes who were coming across. That was another empire system. So usually when these empires break down, there is something else that is some other power center, some other hierarchy that's defeating them. And we more focus on the breakdown than we do on the expansion. So there's a lot of people think there's a kind of a cycle of growth of empires, growth, breakdown. I argue that there is a growth and breakdown, but it's more of a one step backwards, two steps forward kind of thing where you get more concentration over time.
It reminds me of the beginning of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The empire, long united, must divide. Long divided, must unite.
Yeah.
Seems to be the cycle. So from a certain point of view, it seems like a concentration of power is not inherently bad, but after a point, it can become toxic. So what really is, when does that shift happen?
Well, I mean, I would say that it is pretty bad. I mean, I would say in general it's bad. And I think that we, today believe that our system is good because we've been propagandized into believing that, right?
I haven't been propagandized. It's just the best.
But I don't know. I think we have lost freedoms over the centuries.
Mhm.
I think we've lost a lot of diversity. I mean, native populations have been destroyed, right?
I can't
What
even
kind of
duel people
societies-
anymore.
Exactly.
Well, look, what,
That was a freedom that you lost.
Yeah.
That's true.
but like, what are some freedoms that we've lost in America over the last say,
Dueling.
100?
It used to be a presidential thing. A president
Yeah.
could duel.
Which president?
Hamilton?
He was not
He
a
was
president.
He was a Treasury Secretary.
Wasn't he?
He never.
He was
no.
so important though that there's a really great hit musical about him.
Well, anyways, dueling.
So, but besides dueling, which is obviously the most important American institution that has fallen, what are some freedoms that we've lost as, okay, for example, one of the things that's happened in the U.S. is, when you talk about this, is like the federal government has taken on more and more responsibility as state governments have gotten less and less sovereignty, right? So what are some costs that we faced here?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. The executive is taking power from Congress constantly. It's every year, every 5 years, we've got a stronger president than we used to. And I think it's important to think about the native populations and what kind of freedoms they had that we don't have today. What kind of, with the growth of technology and surveillance, there are positive things to it. I can walk in New York City and not feel scared of crime. Right?
Yeah, that's changing.
But in the 70s, it was dangerous to walk at night in Manhattan. But so it's a trade-off. You do get more security over time, but you lose some of the freedom to be walking down the street without being surveilled, for example.
Sure, but I'd trade all my freedom for a little bit of temporary security. I don't see a problem.
Well,
Yeah.
there's that saying, those who would give up freedom for security, this part has been redacted.
That's the original, huh?
As far as I know, I've been propaganda. That's what my propaganda books tell me.